Well, hello, everybody. Once again, this is Rich Ehisen, and you are at the open mic, where on a regular basis, I am afforded the opportunity to talk to some really great writers from across the literary spectrum. I'm joined today by a writer whose work I have long admired. It's really great stuff. If you are not familiar with Craig Lancaster, I highly suggest you become so, because I think you'll feel the same way I do. He's here today to talk with me about his new book and some various other ventures. So, Craig, welcome to the open mic. Thank you for joining.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me, Rich.
Absolutely. Well, as I noted, you have a new book, and it will be a beautiful life. Tell me about it.
And It Will Be a Beautiful Life is it's a book about a middle-aged man who is a pipeline inspector. He's a traveling pipeline inspector. And this work, which he's done since he was a young man, has sort of taken him away from his life as his life has spun on without him. And so as the book opens, he's coming back late from a job, and his wife is angry with him, and his daughter has grown up and become her own person, and this all just starts hitting him in ways that inertia had handled before, and the interesting thing about I didn't think of it as a metaphor, but the interesting thing about fluid dynamics as a sort of the underpinning of this book is that it really is sort of downhill inertia. It just goes. And so what Max at 55 has realized is that his life has just gone. And so the book is largely about his reconciling that.
Those of us who are in that same age range, I'm 57, can certainly relate to that moment when you realize, wow, an awful lot of my life that I have lived, I didn't plan. That wasn't how it was supposed to go. And some of it was really good and some of it less so, but very little of it was by design. So I imagine, it really sounds like this is something that will touch a nerve maybe in a lot of readers.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think you have to be a middle-aged man to feel that. You can, I have felt it at various junctures of my life. I remember, gosh, when my 10-year high school reunion came up, which I couldn't attend because I was in the middle of a move, but I remember thinking at 10 years, gosh, 10 years went by awfully fast. Well, now it's been 33 and, and they didn't slow down any. And I think what Max has found is that so much of his life has taken place in other places and doing this thing he does that the great world has spun on without him, and including the two people in the world that he feels closest to. They have gone on, because we all get one crack at it, right? I mean, the time goes quick, but you can't pull other people along. You've got to live the life that's there in front of you.
It seems like it's a great shock to almost every person at some point in their life to realize that time only moves in one way.
Yeah. I mean, not to be macabre or anything, but I had this discussion with a buddy of mine when Ned Beatty died, and he was just, one of several. Gavin MacLeod. I mean, there's a bunch of them that we're just losing these people who were central to our growing up. And the thing I said to my friend was, he said, we're losing everybody. And I said, dying is the one thing we were born to do, and it's I don't know, if you put your arms around that and you say, okay, well, I'm gonna live the best life I can while I'm here, that's one thing. But to think that is the inevitable conclusion of it all, regardless of our achievements, regardless of our beliefs or whatever, we're all headed for that, and that's the one thing we can count on.
Right.
It's pretty jarring too. So,
well, let me follow that a little bit, because I want to read this description of your work, which I love. Your work's been described as, quote, getting at the grit and the glory of lives ordinary and extraordinary. That is a great description, though it does sound a little bit more serious, I suppose, than much of your writing that I've read, because you really do. There's always such an undercurrent of some humor for sure, but an optimism that maybe isn't noted quite in the way that description, as much as I love it. So how do you describe your work? How do you see your work?
I try not to, just simply because I don't feel like that's my job. My job is to tap into the memory banks. It almost always starts with memory. And then I apply perspective, imagination, all the ingredients of good fiction that sort of take those memories and transform them into something else. So I never get too far into the weeds with how I assess my own work, which also allows me the freedom to approach each thing that I'm working on its own merits, rather than trying to fit it into some sort of, well, this is what I do. I'm glad you noted the humor, because, I couldn't get through this life without laughing. And there's a lot of serious literature that the laughter, the mirthfulness seems to be absent from it. I mean, there's also a lot of serious literature that's darkly hilarious, and but zany doesn't always come into it. And yet, I think about the way I grew up, with a stepfather whom I love, but who also delighted in, jumping out of corners and scaring me and stuff, and delighted in dumb jokes, not dad joke dumb jokes, but just dumb jokes, and it really shaped my humor. And I just couldn't imagine going through life without it. And I don't think that having that aspect of one's personality or viewpoint in any way impedes your ability to think deeply about things as well. It takes all perspectives, I think. So I don't find humor easy to write, but the humor comes to me as I'm writing. And so I would never want to block that out. Right. But I also hope that readers come away thinking, okay, there was something deep there for me. There was something meaty that I could get my arms around and I could think about.
Well, I think in the course of our lives, humor, and often dark humor or sarcastic humor, or because I think you said it before, you couldn't get through life without it. I mean, reality is tough sometimes, and when you're facing challenging situations, personal, financial, employment, whatever it might be, well, I think the human animal often resorts to it. And that's one of the things I really like about your work. It doesn't feel forced, that use of humor. You often have characters who are in, tough situations, losing a relationship, or, being really at the end of their means and that kind of thing, that are scary. And so often I think that's what we resort to. So I've always noted how well you weave that in a way that's very real. Like you say, it's not zany, because very few of us are zany.
Right. Yeah, that only works for certain people. Max, the main character of my new book, Max is more sarcastic, and you learn that sarcasm it's how he gets along in the world, but it's also how he blunts the things that he really doesn't want to deal with, and to the great exasperation of some of the people who love him. I mean, there are a couple of moments in the book where his daughter, who's in her early 30s, just says, I can't take it. I cannot take how you lead with sarcasm. It just drives me nuts, And it does. Sarcasm in particular is a humorous device that can wear on people. Yeah. So,
Well, let me also, you've lived a lot of places.
Sure.
And you've worked a lot of places, and including the East Coast, but mostly in the West. And I'm fascinated by that as a use a cliched term. I'm a child of the West myself. Most of my family's from Wyoming and Montana, and Texas, and a lot of places you're very familiar with. And many of your books, I think all but maybe one, take place in the West, and specifically in and around Montana. And,
right.
But you're not at any time, since all your settings are modern, you're never beholden to the old, cowboys and Indians kind of Western. So when we talk about Western writing, we often don't think of anything modern the way your books are. But it really does feel like you convey an attitude and an understanding of the people of the West in the modern day, as well as anybody I've read. And it is distinct. The way someone born and raised in the South has a distinct view, or in the upper Northeast. There's reasons we have these regional perspectives. And so tell me a little bit about how you, how conscious this may or may not be, and then how, how the modern West plays itself into your stories.
Well, I attribute it, I mentioned earlier the memory thing, and that really is where, every good idea that I've ever had has started with memory. And then it's just a matter of, applying other thoughts to it, so it's not transcription. It is actually a work of imagination that is underpinned by memory. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the way I grew up. I grew up in suburban Fort Worth, Texas, with my mom and my stepdad. But I had a duality to that life where, the 9 months of the school year, I lived in the little house in the neighborhood where all the families were nuclear, and, they had the 3.2 children, and we all tromped off to the elementary school and the junior high and the high school. And everything was sort of shaped by those things, the subdivision with the name that has nothing to do with where it's actually located. And so that way of growing up shaped me in one way. But every summer when I would get done with school, I would be flown out to some remote outpost in the West. I mean, I'm talking Milford, Utah, and Montpelier, Idaho, and Cuba, New Mexico. And just dots on the map. And I would spend the summer with my dad, who was an itinerant well digger. And it was a completely different life. It was, living in fifth wheels and motel rooms, and, picking up the stakes and moving, and really sort of wrestling the earth for a living. Right. And then I would be sent back off to suburban Fort Worth at the end of the summer. And all of those memories come into it. I feel like when I'm moving around in the West and I'm meeting people, I feel like I have a basis for talking to just about anybody. There's some way I can find a way in and know at least a little something about the way they live life and the way they view the world. Even if I don't agree with them, even if I don't, even if I don't have any direct experience with it, I have glancing experience with it. But I can find a way to put my boots on the same patch of ground that they're standing on, and that to me is a way of finding a way forward with someone, and that's hugely important to what I do, because so much of it is, okay, I have to achieve, I've dreamed up these characters, now I have to achieve empathy with them so I can feel what they feel and see what they see and understand the choices they're making, even if I would have never, ever, ever made that choice. And, it's one of the great gifts of fiction in doing what I do, is that ability.
Right, right. So your first novel, you self-published it.
Right.
It was then later picked up by a publisher, and it became an international bestseller, which I swear is the dream, of, I think the quote I saw from you, you said one time you would have been thrilled just to have somebody buy it that wasn't a member of your family. And so I could say, I think we could agree you accomplished a lot more than that with this book. But tell me about the experience, because certainly we know self-publication is very different now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And this is not the norm, though, to have it come out. How did it work out for you?
Well, I would say, it's not the norm, but there are people who've been wildly more successful at it than I ever was too. So that's, it's an interesting thing. I've come to view all the books as sort of this faithful leap into the dark and not knowing, what's going to become of them, and learning to embrace that unknown and keep myself fixated on the part of it that I can control, which is how good the work is, period. So, with 600 Hours of Edward, that book was kissed, blessed, something good was going on there, because it just got lucky at a lot of different turns. I self-published it, and it ended up in the hands of this small Montana publisher who called me one day and said, I want to bring this out. And he did. And, it picked up some nice regional awards that I'm sure it wouldn't have been in contention for, back when I was selling it out of the back of my car. And then there came a point when a larger publisher came and sniffed around it, and it's been translated into several languages, and it's just hard to imagine how or why all that stuff happened, except that I feel like is a good book. I look at it now and I'm sort of charmed by how much I didn't know about writing a book at the time, and how much better I think I am now. But that's the book that's gone gangbusters. Not all of them have.
Well, isn't that part of the deal, though, too? I mean, it is strange. The industry, to me, is strange, because it often does not make any sense. And that's maybe some of it. The book you think maybe is your best is the one that no one wants to buy. And then something that maybe a slightly genre thing that you turn out on a whim turns out to be the one. And I'm not saying you specifically, I'm just thinking of writers.
Yeah, anybody. Yeah.
And I guess along those lines, the industry has changed a lot, and a lot of it's really become very genre specific. And for writers like you, where your work is often considered more general fiction or something along those lines, how do you see the industry now in terms of whether it's better for writers than it used to be? We certainly have more venues, or more venues is not the right word. More
platforms. Yeah.
Platforms. Thank you. There's more ways to do it now than there ever used to be. At the same time, it's harder to get noticed because there's a lot more noise out there and there's more competition. How do you see the industry? And if you were just starting now, would self-publication still be something you would consider doing?
Well, I I have a hard time applying a blanket statement like things are better or worse for writers. I mean, I think it really depends on the writer and it depends on the book. If I were starting out now, I would absolutely have self-publishing be at least part of what I was attempting to do. I would, and there have been occasional projects that I have subsequently self-published for whatever reason. And I just can't imagine, I'm too much of a DIY person to let go of that. And I think the best thing writers can do is keep their options open. This new book is my first book with a new publisher, and it's a small publisher based on the East Coast. I knew going in that I would love to have a New York Times bestseller, but I suspect that that's not going to happen with this book, and that's fine. What I wanted more than anything else was a true editorial partnership with someone who got me and got what I was attempting to do and could be an equal partner in, let's write and publish good books. And I'm certain that I've found that. And so now it's sort of on the books to do their part. We've done ours and we'll continue to do ours. And, the books have to find an audience. What's tough for writers, I think, is that there's the art end of it, which I think we understand. And then there's the commerce part of it, which we may or may not understand, depending on what our background is or how what we've learned along the way. And the commerce end of it is that the book comes out and you have 4 to 6 weeks to make your impression or not make your impression. And then everything sort of slowly recedes because, as we talked about earlier in a different way, the great world marches on and there are other books that are going to come out and they're going to need that shelf space and all of that. So I work way too hard on these books for me to be like, well, 4 or 6 weeks are going to be, I'm going to tie up all of my self-worth and all of my dreams in these 4 or 6 weeks. This book and I it's like a child, we're bound together. And I'm going to be proud of this book, and I'm going to, when it's appropriate to do so, I'm going to tell strangers how proud I am of this book and, how much they would enjoy meeting this book, and I'm fine with that. The best I can do, I really feel this, the best I can do is sit down by myself and do the work as best I can, and then take it to my publisher, and he and I will try to make it better. And when it's ready to go, it's ready to go. Yeah.
So, you and I are both reporters. And so I feel like I have a general understanding of the mindset and why a lot of times reporters make good writers, and maybe sometimes why they don't. But you were also an editor for a very long time. And so this was originally 2 questions. I'm going to meld it into one. First, how much did your experience as an editor in the world of journalism help you as a writer of fiction? And then I understand you spent a year covering the Oakland Raiders. Yeah. And as someone who grew up in Northern California as a diehard lifetime mental disease Oakland Raiders fan, I say that it feels like a mental disease sometimes.
Yeah.
I wanted you to maybe express a little bit about how that experience was, and maybe is there something that the average sports fan does not understand about what it takes to cover a professional team like that and write about a professional team? You could take those in either order.
Okay. Well, how my background as an editor, I'm actually still a professional copy editor. So the background as an editor helped me in 2 ways. One is that I've worked with a lot of different writers and who have a lot of different strengths, and helping them be the best versions of themselves professionally. I take no responsibility for their humanity, but just as in terms of doing the work, it's just been one of the great privileges of my life, and it has allowed me to see the many different ways the work can be done and adapt to that, and edit in other people's voices and all of that good stuff. You know, I don't convert it into what I would have written. I try to help them be the best version of what they're trying to do. So that improved my writing from the standpoint of I saw all these different things, and I was able to harness the way in which I was working with those writers and bring it to my own silent, quiet work in fiction. The other aspect of that's been interesting is I really embrace editing. I really appreciate the value of good editing because I've seen it from both sides. So I won't say I've never had an adversarial relationship with an editor, but I don't seek out the adversarial. I don't approach it as I've got to protect my stuff here, you know. So that's been helpful. It's allowed me to work well with all parts of the process, you know, the composition, the editing, the proofreading, the quality control. The Oakland Raiders. So there's a little bit of a backstory there. I was being groomed for a management role at the paper I was at, and I had said to my bosses that I didn't want to do that job until I had covered one of the professional beats, because I never wanted to be the guy in the office telling a professional beat writer, well, this is what I want you to do, and having no idea what his or her reality was. And so the Raiders beat came open. It was fairly late in the cycle, like we were about to go to training camp. They said, okay, you know, here's your chance. And it was the team. I hate to bring up bad memories for you, Rich, but it was the team the year after the Super Bowl debacle in San Diego. Okay. So great expectations for this team, right? They were coming off, you know, they were coming off this bad performance, but they had a wonderful year. They still had an MVP quarterback. They still had all this skill. And, you know, the Barrett Robbins thing just wasn't going to happen every single year, you didn't think. And so, and then they tanked. I mean, they went 4-12. It was an awful year. There was a locker room mutiny against the coach. You know, as things got worse, it was just, we would go into the locker room during our daily hour in there, where it's just an open locker room and you can talk to whoever wants to talk to you. And those guys, they were nowhere to be seen. Nobody wanted to be in that locker room. Nobody wanted to talk to us.
Right.
I had to become really resourceful about who I talked to around the team, or who had some operational knowledge of what they might be going through, and start to structure stories that didn't rely quite so much on Trace Armstrong standing there and talking to me. He was actually one of the better ones, but a lot of the people I wanted to talk to, the only time they could ever be talked to was game day Sunday. And those were mostly losses. I mean, this was the year of Bill Callahan saying he had the stupidest team in America.
Yeah, I remember.
And he might not have been wrong about that, but you know, it was just it was a slog. I mean, you know, one of the things that people fans don't realize about journalists is we're not fans of the teams we cover. If we're doing it right, we're not fans of the teams we cover. It didn't matter to me whether they won or lost. I just wanted to give the best possible accounting of the season that I could. but I will say that a winning team is much more fun to cover. So
Yeah.
from the standpoint of, is my daily life covering this team going to be enjoyable or not? I suppose, most journalists would say, give me a winning team, because then,
At least their moods are better.
yeah. And, so, and the Raiders are an interesting franchise. I can't speak to them post Al Davis, but, he was still quite alive in 2003, and secretive would be a word that would accurately describe the Raiders. I had good operational relationships with everybody there that I should have had. Callahan and I clashed a couple of times, but it wasn't anything that was remarkable. He was protecting his turf, and I was trying to get him to give us actual legitimate information. And as the year went on and things got more difficult for him, it got harder for me and for the rest of the reporters to,
It's a tough beat, right? It probably, I'm going to guess though, that slog and the grinding it out to the end when it feels like that's not possible was probably helpful for you in writing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And there was if you're a sports writer or any kind of journalistic writer, you don't get to hide behind, I don't want to do it today, or gosh, it's the words aren't coming, because it doesn't matter. You got to produce it. I mean, and I covered just that one season. I covered it, entered in July, walked out of it in January. And during that time, I wrote hundreds of stories. I can't remember now what the count was, but it was hundreds of stories. It was daily work. And that's a lot. That's a lot of writing. Certainly much more than I do today. And it was every single day, drive down the 880, sit, wait for practice to be done, go to the locker room, go back, transcribe my interviews, wait for Callahan to come out after afternoon practice, work the phones, go back to my little apartment, transcribe some more, write my stories, it's just every single day, blah, 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 blah. And if you weren't doing that, you were traveling, so,
right.
Yeah. So,
well,
yeah,
I
have a great deal of respect. Yeah, I have a great deal of respect for the people who can grind like that year after year after year after year. One is enough for me. Send me back to the office. Yeah.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for the folks. Of course, I've been covering politics now for a long time, but same thing. A lot of folks you got to get in. Sometimes it's, some people are easier to deal with than others. Sometimes the stories are more challenging than others, and there's reasons people want to keep things in, as in anything you cover, right? But the words don't write themselves, so you got to go through that. So I admire it greatly, the folks who are on daily beats, because that is tough work.
It is, and they love it. They have to. There's no. If you didn't love it, you would find something easier and more lucrative to do, of which
there are both.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I do like to end on what I hope is a fun question. I mean for it to be a fun question. I always caveat that because, we'll make you a little nervous for just a moment here. Now, what I like to do is I'd like to posit the idea that I had the power to put you together with just one of the following three people for a good conversation, maybe dinner and a drink. Who would you choose and why? The three options that I'm going to give you are Jeanette Rankin, who is the first woman ever elected to Congress, of course, from Montana, George Custer, who I don't have to explain to anybody, or the great actor Gary Cooper, all with strong Montana ties. So of those three, if I could put you together with one of them, who would it be and why?
I think I would have to choose Gary Cooper, at least in part, so I could go and tell my dad afterward, since, since he's such a high noon guy. But I would want to talk to him, drawing on the journalism background. I rather than a free flow, I would hope for a free flowing conversation, but I'm sure it would start with me just asking questions. And I would want to know about Montana of his time. Once he was in Hollywood, how often did he think of it? I know he came back and hunted, and he was friends with Hemingway, and they did that. But gosh, yeah, I would want to know. I would probably want to know more about the movies that we don't think of. Not so much Sergeant York or High Noon, but take a movie that's not even all that terrific, The Fountainhead, and like he and Patricia Neal are about to catch fire in that movie. I mean, there is so much chemistry, and what was that like? Yeah. What was that like? And I'd want to hear all those old Hollywood stories too. I'm not sure he would, though. He was a pretty taciturn, pretty close to the vest guy, but that would be part of the challenge, I think. But all three of them, of course, are wonderful, except maybe Custer, who didn't you know that it was probably not a good thing when you graduated at the foot of your class at West Point? Didn't anybody just pull you aside and say that you're just kind of a moron?
Yeah. He had a fabulous memory. That was the thing that saved him. He had an almost photographic memory, because he, that's how he managed to get through barely, as you know, at the very bottom of his class. Because if it hadn't been for that, he would have failed. He would have flunked out, and that would have changed.
And better for everyone.
Yeah. Well, Craig, thank you very much. I want to thank you again, and I want to just briefly, I want to give folks a shout out for one of your books, one of your older books that I hadn't got around to reading until just recently, which is The Art of Departure, which is a book of short stories. And I didn't get around to asking you about writing short stories, but it's a beautiful art. It is so different, I know, from writing novels. You do it so well. And I highly recommend this to anybody, because you did the thing that I love, which is a theme through these stories, and yet they're all so incredibly different and so incredibly well paced, and it's just beautiful stuff. And I just wanted to tell you that, because I love compilations, and I love anthologies and short stories of all kinds. And that some writers don't, their forte is elsewhere.
Right.
You really did a great job with that. So,
well, I really appreciate that. I'm proud of that book. So the medal up above my head is that book won that gold medal, and so I've always been proud of that. So
outstanding. Well, we'll learn. Well, once again, thanks to Craig Lancaster. If you get the chance, please go out and buy a copy of "And It Will Be a Beautiful Life" or any of his books, because I'm going to read that one next. It's in my gigantic to be read stack. Right. But if it's anything like your previous work, I know I'm going to love it. Thanks for taking out time today. Good luck with the book, and maybe we'll have you on again whenever the next one comes out.
I would love that. Thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely, and. Folks, stay with me. Join us. If you haven't done it already, I do the obligatory, please subscribe. I'm not sure why anyone would pay for a masterclass when you can come here and see folks like this, give you great insight for free. So anyway, until next time, Rich Ehisen and the Open Mic. Take care.